So, welcome. Over this distance learning, we're going to be looking at Nazi Germany during the 1930s, and in particularly looking at two questions. Number one, how did Adolf Hitler transform what was a democracy, the Weimar Republic, into a dictatorship? And number two, how did he begin to discriminate against Jews and pave the way towards the Holocaust? So, depending on how you date the Holocaust, certainly what we think of as the Holocaust in terms of concentration camps and the mass murder of people isn't happening yet. But you see the steps, the escalation towards the Holocaust. So, those are the two things we're going to be looking at. There are a lot of number of steps that were taken to kind of make this transition. On the right, you see the German Parliament, the Reichstag, fire, which mysteriously burned down in 1933, just when Hitler came to power, and which was an event that he used to take legal emergency powers and become more of a dictator. Another thing we're going to look at, and you see this in a photo to the left, is Hitler and the Nazi regime's use of propaganda. So you can see here a Nazi party rally in the 1930s, and you see this framed photo of Hitler that's showing him, as the center of attention, as the center of this regime. And it shows well, as we'll look at, his use of propaganda to really create a dictatorship, to make people believe what he did, to be anti-Semitic, to support him, all these different ways. So those are some of the things we're going to be looking at. So, first off, the first couple years, and you watched a video about this before this PowerPoint, we're going to be looking at consolidation, how he came to power, again, legally appointed in what was supposed to be the democratic way, appointed, but then quickly becoming a dictator. So in 1933, in January, he was, because he had a significant number of votes in the parliament, not a majority, but a significant number, he maneuvered himself to be appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Hindenburg. But Hitler quickly starts acting like a dictator, and he even calls the state, this is going to be what he calls a Third Reich, or a Third Empire. The First Empire being the Roman Empire, under the Caesars, the Second Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. He thinks this country, the Nazi country, is going to be a third empire. And now in February and March, he takes two big steps to take more power. One is the Reichstag fire decree, where after that mysterious fire, he gets President Hindenburg to basically give him some emergency powers that were, again, part of the Weimar Constitution. Those emergency powers that the president had, so giving him more powers to censor the press and kind of arrest people without cause. And then number two, he actually gets Parliament to vote an act called the Enabling Act, where he gets some of the moderate parties in there to vote to give him the power to make laws, that Hitler himself can make a law. It doesn't need to be passed by the parliament itself. So kind of, some people say the Reichstag votes for its own death. In April of that first year, the Nazi government begins the first boycotts of businesses. So they say, don't go out and buy things from Jewish businesses. They start to discriminate against Jews. They start to say, you can't work for the government. You can't be in a government job. And in June, the Nazis, by that point, they actually ban all other political parties. So just in a couple months, they've really turned away from a democracy. They're the only political party allowed. In 1934, that's when Hitler really takes full dictatorial power. There's no question that by the end of 1934, he is the absolute dictator of Germany. In June, he has an event called the Night of Long Knives, where he actually kills a lot of political opponents of his. Some outside of his party, but actually anyone within his party that he was worried that would threaten him. that was he was worried could be a separate power to him, and that helps assure the support of the army. He promises the army that the Nazis won't take over them, that the army will be independent, and that makes sure the army won't threaten his power. And in August, President Hindenburg dies, and Hitler immediately announces that he's going to take over as president, and he's going to be the only leader in Germany. And he calls himself the Führer, which literally means leader. Like, that's its own title. He is just so special. He is going to be the leader, absolute leader of Germany. Now, you see here the two photos, one of the Reichstag fire where the parliament burned in 1933. Mysteriously, some people have blamed it on Hitler. Historically, they think he did this to take advantage of it. Some historians have actually said, it may just have been one, random person who did it, and actually wasn't Hitler's fault. But regardless, Hitler took advantage of it. He said it's the communists who are doing it. We need to take action against them. And so he persuaded President Hindenburg to issue the Reichstag fire decree, to suspend civil liberties, individual rights, to arrest political opponents, to censor the press, the media, the newspapers, to start to become a dictator. And again, the next month, the parliament, now meeting not in the building because it was burned down, but actually in an opera house. Fun fact for Mr. Marrow always, he gets them to pass a law making themselves redundant, called the Enabling Act, and it enables him to pass laws. And he promises that he'll respect certain rights, including of Christian churches and the Catholic Church, and he promises this, and people believe him. That may not have been the wisest thing on their part. Now, 1935 is really when his dictatorship expands. The Nazis in 1935 pass what are the most famous group of laws from Nazi Germany that many adults in America would at least know the name of this, called the Nuremberg Laws. And they discriminate against Jews, and they remove their German citizenship. They say they're no longer German citizens. And in a second, we will explain what those are. In 1936, Germany really turned its back on the Treaty of Versailles. They remilitarize a region of Germany called the Rhineland, which neighbored France, which they hadn't been allowed to do by the Treaty of Versailles. And they end other restrictions. They stop paying. By this point, either before 1936 or after 1936, they expand the army. They stop paying reparations. They basically say, we're done with the Treaty of Versailles. But most other countries think they're a little scared of Hitler, or they think the Treaty of Versailles was unfair, so they say, fine, if Germany wants to do that. In 1938 is really when things are rising. In March, Germany annexes its neighbor to the south, Austria, which was a German people who speak the German language, which is where, again, as you remember, Hitler was originally from, in what was called the Anschluss, or it literally means union. Now, many Germans liked this. It was popular. It expands Germany territorially in the population, but it also, too, had been forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles. But it makes Germany very, very popular. In October, Germany also annexes, and again, to annex is to take over a territory and add it to your own country. Part of Czechoslovakia, which neighbored Germany, where people spoke German, which was called the Sudetenland. But as we'll look at in a second, international leaders kind of say, fine, if these people speak German, that's fine. And then in November, there's a big event called Kristallnacht, a pogrom, the Night of Broken Glass, which is a real escalation in the violence against Jews. So the Nuremberg Laws, kind of the key anti-Semitic laws, and again, we're talking about laws so far, not concentration camps yet, but still important in paving that path to the Holocaust. With these 1935 Nuremberg Laws, which were called that because Hitler announced them in a Nazi party rally in the city of Nuremberg, he writes what his party believed about racism into law. The Nuremberg Laws, what they literally do is they say Jews are no longer German citizens, and anyone of Jewish blood is unable to marry someone who's not of who's of German blood, They're not even able to have sex with anyone. They're worried about that idea of breeding. The way he defines in these laws, and that's a key question, being Jewish is not about your religious beliefs, but about your birth. So if you had 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, then you were defined as Jewish through your blood. No matter what you believe, no matter if you went to synagogue, no matter if you identified as Jewish, whatever, you were defined. People often ask, well, what about 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents? You were given a status called Mischlinge, which literally translates in German to mixed breed. And the Nazis didn't quite know what to do with these groups of people. They thought they were part Aryan, part Jewish, and they discriminated them to some extent, but not quite as much as people with 3 or 4 Jews. And so here in this photo here, you see a chart showing, again, that word pseudoscientific, so not real science, but what the Nazi science the Nazis invented the attempts to try and classify if you have 1 grandparent, 2 grandparents, 3 grandparents, and a parent, etc., etc. Are you a Jew? Are you a Mischlinge? What's the deal? 1936 also sees the Olympics, which is an interesting event for a lot of reasons. It was in Germany. It was a chance for Germany to show off his new country, reinvigorated by his Nazi party. He was trying to kind of show off in front of the world. But he was also trying to prove that his race was better. And so what's interesting about this event is that Hitler both tries to tamp down on any public signs of his discrimination. He takes down anti-Semitic signs that say, let's say, no Jews allowed in this, store or restroom, something like that. But he also, really wants to show my German Aryan athletes are the best. And yet, as some of you may know, very famously, an African-American athlete, Jesse Owens, really was the most famous athlete of this Olympics, winning kind of the most significant running events, the 100 meters, 200 meters long jump, and the 100-meter relay, and embarrassed Hitler. Because Hitler was racist against Jews, but also against people of African descent, and this terrific American runner, this African-American runner, defeated Germans, the Nazis' prize athletes, and kind of said, well, these racial doctrines of yours aren't real. So 1938 was an important turning point for Nazi Germany. And one of the most important ways that it was a turning point was in the Nazi regime's discrimination against Jews. So in November 1938, they organized a nationwide pogrom against Jews. As you'll remember from earlier in the course, pogrom is a word we use to talk about organized violence, like a massacre or a riot against a specific community, especially Jews. That term originally comes from Russia. Now it's being applied to Germany. And this pogrom happens in November 1938 in response to a Jewish German man, assassinating a German Nazi diplomat in Paris, trying to protest the discrimination against his family in Germany, against his Jewish family. And the Nazis respond with this violent attack on Jews. In this really 1-2 days, they attack and they ransack and they burn Jewish synagogues. They vandalize and they graffiti Jewish businesses and homes. They attack Jews out in the open, on the streets. They arrest them in large numbers for no reasons. And this is new. It is a turning point. Beforehand, the Nazis had discriminated against Jews legally. They'd taken away their citizenship, taken away certain jobs, forbid them from certain, employments. And there have been one-off, sporadic violence here or there. But this is the first major, organized, public outbreak of violence against Jews and against Jewish property under the Nazis. And it is a turning point because many Jews realize this in Germany, realize this is the moment. The Nazis are not temporary. It's not a fad. They're not going to get better. Hitler's serious, and it's time to leave. And many Jews in Germany leave the country at this point. Some don't, either because they don't want to believe it or because they're not just simply not able to. Many foreigners and even some people in Germany are appalled by this event. In the U.S., many newspapers report on it. Franklin Roosevelt publicly condemns it, yet they don't do much, either because there isn't significant steps they can take, or because they're for a variety of reasons scared to make a stand against Hitler. So in the above photo you see of this event, a synagogue in Berlin, vandalized by the Nazis, burnt, glass broken. Below you see a Jewish business, which has had rocks thrown at its window and it's been attacked. And that's where it gets its name, actually. Kristallnacht in German means night of broken glass, because the experience of so many non-Jewish Germans of that night was to hear on the night of, or to wake up the next day and to see broken glass, all these shops, all these synagogues, all these homes. That was their experience of the event, and that's where it gets its name. 1938, also important for Germans on the path to World War II. The Anschluss, as we mentioned, was that union with Austria. The government of Austria opposed it, but Hitler kind of marched into Austria anyway, and many Austrians cheered him in the streets, welcomed him in to Austria, and expanded Germany, made it more of a world power. In November 1938, Hitler demanded that he would be given the territory of Sudetenland, which is a part of Czechoslovakia where many people spoke German. And the other European countries, and you see a photo here of the Prime Minister of England on the left, of France, Italian ministers, said, okay, fine, your country has had a rough time for the past 20 years. We're going to say, yes, you can have this region of the Sudetenland. We will give this to you if you promise no other demands in Austria. This is a policy, as you'll learn in high school, called appeasement. So they give them that. They say, that'll be for you. But in 1939, in March, he annexes and invades the rest of Czechoslovakia, which is kind of the spark that makes other countries which had tried to downplay his threats or not take him seriously to think, okay, Hitler's he's serious now. He's on the path to war. In August, he concludes a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, which says they won't invade each other. And then in September, he invades Poland, which is traditionally the start of World War II. And that is the step at which Britain and France say, nope, we will stop you right there. That is a line too far. We will declare war on you. And that's the start of World War I. You can't keep on invading countries. He invades Poland, takes over a significant part of it. In 1940, after the war for a bit, there hadn't been a lot of fighting between Britain and France on one side and Germany on the other side. He invades France, and in a terrific victory for him, he is able to quickly defeat the French army, and France bows out of the war. Britain, with the Dunkirk evacuation, if any of you have seen that movie, I highly recommend, vows that it'll fight on, but it's kind of on its own, on an island. In 1941, Germany invades first Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, which is, they at first do very well, but those are two huge countries, so they begin this large and vicious fighting. And then in December, Hitler, in this act of hubris, overconfidence, after Japan had attacked USA at Pearl Harbor, Hitler declares war on the U.S. as well. And so now Nazi Germany was at war with Britain, Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, and the U.S. And that is arguably the point when he can no longer win. This is important not just because World War II is important, which I highly recommend. It's a fascinating event, one of the more important wars ever in history, but the Holocaust takes place in World War II, and that's important. It takes place against the backdrop of fighting, and as I say, war is not normal. It's not a normal event. People do things in war that they don't normally do, and it takes place by soldiers in many cases. The Holocaust takes place mostly in territories that Germans had occupied. So they're able to do certain things in war that they were able to begin in peacetime, but not necessarily able to do in peacetime. So important for understanding the Holocaust. So just to summarize the major phases, in 1933, 1934, those first 2 years, Hitler transforms what had been a democratic state, the Weimar Republic, to be a one-party, so the Nazi Party is the only party in the country. Dictatorship, he's the dictator, sole head of all authority, and totalitarian government. Now, totalitarian government is a kind of government where you attempt to control all aspects of life in a country, and you require total obedience of every citizen. And when I say control all aspects, I mean art, culture, press. It's not just about having all power; it's about trying to be involved in every part of life. Hitler's regime in those first 5 years, 1933 to 1938, they unveil various legal, political, and cultural discrimination against Jews. They take away their citizenship. They take away certain jobs. But these efforts are not what we think of as the Holocaust. They pave the way for it, but they're not widespread and public violence until we really have that Kristallnacht pogrom in 1938. In those same years, Hitler was building up his military in preparation for a significant war. He wanted to invade other countries. That was part of his worldview. In 1938, 1939, he starts expanding into Europe, other countries. At first, European countries like Britain and France want to appease him. They want to, basically pay him off with land. But his greed is so obvious that they finally wise up. And when he invades Poland, that's the last straw, and that's when World War II begins in 1939. In 1939, from 39 to 41, he invades France, Soviet Union, a number of other countries, and all of Europe is plunged into war. And then when Japan gets involved, when Germany declares war on the U.S., this is a world war. And that is the backdrop against which the Holocaust as we know it occurs. So some key dates, just to finish up. This is the last slide. I promise if you are still alive, still listening, Mr. Marrow is thinking of you. These are just some key terms, key dates, which I will test you on at some point. So you should be clear on these. 1933 saw the first boycott of Jewish businesses, so where the Nazis basically said, don't buy Jewish businesses. The first firing of Jewish employees, so that's the first step of discrimination. 1933 saw these two key legal steps to becoming a dictatorship, the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act. And that term, the Third Reich, you'll see a lot, along with one of those key terms like Nazi and so forth, or Führer, where it's what he called Nazi Germany. The Führer is the title he used, which literally just means leader, but it showed the kind of dictator he was. Night of Long Knives was that series of assassinations of other people in Germany, which he used to take power and basically cement his dictatorship. The Nuremberg Laws, 1935, were the laws that stripped Jews of citizenship, took away their certain rights, kind of separated them from the population, and we'll look more at how important they were and kind of separating Jews and non-Jewish Germans from each other. Kristallnacht, that first public pogrom against Jews, that first major out in the open public violence, super important to kind of pave the path towards the Holocaust. The Anschluss, which is a term you should know, is a term for the union with Austria, where Hitler expanded Germany by marching into Austria. World War II began in 1939. Dates are important. It ends in 1945. We'll look at that later, but 1939, and then that World War II really expands in 1941 with the invasion of the Soviet Union. And that, we'll look at this, but that's really when the Holocaust starts, is in connection with that invasion of the Soviet Union. When what you think of as the Holocaust really starts with the Soviet Union. So I hope that is kind of a good overview, that I wasn't too boring, speaking too slowly or too fastly. I'm sorry. But a good overview of the events from 1933 to 1939. I hope that's all clear. Please email me any questions if you have them, and use all that with the slides to look at do the questions I've assigned on my Baylor. I hope you stay safe. I love you all. I'm thinking of you. Email me any questions you have. Thanks.